Let's break down the most important scene in the entire MCU, the conference room scene in Captain America: Civil War, the scene that killed the Avengers. It's wild when you think about it, but these 4 minutes of arguing over a desk changed the entire trajectory of the franchise forever. Now, the way the Russo brothers shot this is actually kind of terrifying because it doesn't look like a superhero movie at all. It looks like a documentary of a family falling apart in real time. I want you to look at the way the characters are positioned because it's a masterclass in staging a visual divorce without ever saying the word. Tony isn't even sitting at the table for a good chunk of this. Robert Downey Jr. plays this with such a frantic, restless energy that feels miles away from the cool, confident billionaire we met in 2008. He's pacing, he's rubbing his face, and he's refusing to make eye contact with anyone. He's physically separating himself from the group because, in his head, he's already checked out. He isn't a leader here. He's a man looking for an exit strategy from his own conscience. His breathing is shallow, his movements are jerky, and he looks like he hasn't slept in a week. Then you have Steve. Chris Evans plays this by being the complete opposite. He is rooted, he is immovable, he's sitting at the head of the table, reading through the accords with the intensity of a man studying a trap. He doesn't need to pace because his moral compass is fixed, and that makes him the most dangerous person in the room for someone like Tony. The camera constantly places them on opposite sides of the frame, often with a lot of dead space between them. They're rarely in the same shot looking at each other. They're talking at each other, but they've stopped communicating. It's intimate, it's claustrophobic, and it's painful to watch because you can see the foundation cracking. The weight of the binder. To really understand why Tony is so ready to hand over the keys to the kingdom, you have to look at the psychological toll of being Tony Stark. Just before this meeting, he's ambushed by a grieving mother at MIT. It's a quiet, devastating moment that completely shatters his remaining ego. Tony has been carrying the weight of his mistakes since the first Iron Man. He built the weapons that killed Wanda's parents. He built Ultron, the AI that literally tried to drop a city on the world. Every time he tries to do something good, he seems to create a new monster that he then has to fight. It's a cycle of creation and destruction that has left him completely hollowed out. When Tony says, "We need to be put in check," he isn't just talking about superhero oversight. He's making a confession. He's terrified of his own shadow, and he's basically asking the UN to cut him off at the superhero bar because he knows he can't stop himself. His position is pure utilitarianism. Minimize the harm by any means necessary, even if it means surrendering your autonomy. He looks at that binder and sees a safety net. He sees a way to finally sleep at night without seeing the faces of the people he couldn't save. It's an uncomfortable anxiety for the audience because we've spent years rooting for his independence, and now we're watching him beg for a leash. For Tony, the accords aren't just a law, they're a penance. He's willing to trade his freedom for the illusion of a clean conscience, and he can't understand why Steve won't do the same. It's that fundamental disconnect that makes the scene so heavy. Tony thinks he's being responsible, but he's actually just being scared. And that fear is what ultimately drives the wedge deep enough to break the world. The trust paradox. Steve Rogers sees that same binder and sees a leash. And the thing is, Steve has every reason in the world to be paranoid. He's the man out of time. And that time was a period where you knew who the enemy was because they wore a specific uniform. But in the modern world, he's watched the government organization he trusted, SHIELD, turn out to be a front for Hydra. He's seen how committees and agendas work from the inside. His argument is simple. Governments change. People in power change. If the Avengers sign their rights away to a UN panel, they're no longer heroes. They're tools. What if the UN orders them to go somewhere they shouldn't? Or worse, what if there's a disaster they could stop, but the panel tells them to stand down because of political optics? Steve's line, "The safest hands are still our own," is often framed as being arrogant, but if you think about it, it's the ultimate act of moral responsibility. He's refusing to outsource his conscience. He's saying that if he sees someone drowning, he's going to jump in, regardless of whether a bureaucrat gave him a permit. He knows that once you give up the power to choose, you give up the power to be good. Notice Steve's posture here. He doesn't move. He doesn't fidget. He sits there like a statue, representing the immovable object to Tony's unstoppable force. He looks at the accords and sees the same kind of systemic corruption he fought in the Winter Soldier. He's not being difficult, he's being consistent, and that's the tragedy. Tony is trying to save the world from the Avengers, and Steve is trying to save the world with them. They both want the same thing, but their life experiences have made their methods fundamentally incompatible. Steve's distrust of authority is a survival instinct he's honed over decades. He knows that the moment you start asking for permission to do the right thing, you've already lost. The Vision equation. While the divorcing parents are arguing, Vision drops the coldest, most analytical line of the entire debate. He points out that their very strength invites challenge, challenge incites conflict, and conflict breeds catastrophe. He's describing a superhero arms race that nobody else wants to acknowledge. It's a chilling observation because it suggests that the Avengers don't just solve problems, they might be the source of them. The higher they fly, the bigger the monsters that crawl out of the dark to knock them down. Think about the villains we've seen since this scene. Vulture, Mysterio, even the Flag Smashers. These are all people whose lives were upended or challenged by the existence of the Avengers. Vision is looking at the math of the universe and seeing a downward spiral. He's an android who can calculate every probability, and his conclusion is that they have to put themselves in check or the world will keep leveling up to match them. He's trying to bring logic to a room full of raw emotion, but his words just add more weight to the suffocating atmosphere. Look at the way Vision is framed. He's usually slightly apart from the others, floating or sitting with a stillness that feels inhuman. He represents the objective view, but even he can't bridge the gap. His logic is sound, but logic doesn't fix a broken friendship. It only highlights how far gone the team really is. The spark in Lagos. None of this would have happened without Lagos. It was supposed to be a routine stop, but Wanda's split-second decision to move a blast away from a crowd ended up destroying a building full of humanitarian workers. If you watch that scene closely, you can see the exact moment Wanda realizes what happened. Her eyes go wide, her hands start to tremble, and she just freezes. It's a look of pure, unadulterated horror. She isn't just a teammate anymore. She's the reason the world is afraid. In the conference room, Wanda barely says a word. She just sits there, drowning in guilt. She knows she is the face of the uncontrolled power that Ross is talking about. The camera keeps cutting back to her reaction shots, emphasizing her isolation. She's the youngest person in the room, and she's being treated like a ticking time bomb. The thematic resonance here is about the erosion of the hero narrative. Up until this point, the collateral damage was mostly brushed over, but here, the film forces us to sit in the silence of that failure. It turns the Avengers from legends into people who are just as scared and flawed as the rest of us. Lagos was the spark that caught the fuel on fire. It gave Ross the leverage he needed to walk into that room and demand their signatures. It turned a philosophical debate into a legal reality. Without Wanda's mistake, the Accords might have stayed a theoretical discussion, but once that building fell, the time for talking was over. The cost of their power had finally become too high for the world to ignore, and Wanda has to sit there and listen to the bill being read out loud. The architect of the fall. While Ross is the one handing out the binders, the real architect of the Avengers' collapse is Baron Zemo. And what makes Zemo so brilliant is that he didn't use a single superpower to beat them. He just understood their psychology better than they did. He knew that if he pushed the right buttons, the team would tear themselves apart over their own ideologies. He didn't need to fight them. He just needed to wait for them to finish the job themselves. Zemo's motivation is the ultimate grounded horror. His family died in Sokovia, not because the Avengers lost, but because they won. He's the living embodiment of the collateral damage Tony is trying to avoid, and Steve is trying to manage. Zemo's philosophy is devastatingly simple. An empire toppled by its enemies can rise again, but one that collapses from within, that stays dead. He's the one who realized that the Avengers' greatest weakness wasn't their lack of power, but their lack of trust. He stacked the fuel, the guilt, the mistrust, the Sokovia Accords, and then he just provided the spark with Bucky. Without that conference room scene, Zemo's plan would have never worked. This debate was the earthquake that created the cracks. Zemo just poured the water in and waited for it to freeze and shatter. He turned their moral dilemmas into a death trap. He proved that the most effective way to kill a god is to make him doubt his own divinity. The Infinity War tax. Here's where it gets truly heartbreaking. The Russo brothers later confirmed that the reason the Avengers lost to Thanos in Infinity War is because they were divided. If you think about it, they almost beat him multiple times. On Titan, they were seconds away from getting the gauntlet off. In Wakanda, they were fighting a war on two fronts without their best strategist, Tony, and their heaviest firepower, Wanda, being in the same place. If they had been a unified team, if they hadn't been scattered across the globe as pardoned fugitives or isolated on compounds, they would have won. When the Black Order attacks New York, Tony pulls out that flip phone, the one Steve sent him at the end of Civil War. It's the ultimate symbol of their broken connection. He hesitates, he waits, and by the time he's ready to make the call, it's too late. The universe paid the price for the argument they had in that conference room. Half of all life was erased because two friends couldn't agree on who should hold the steering wheel. Every person who turned to dust was a casualty of this 4-minute conversation. The world realized that putting bureaucratic red tape on superheroes was a death sentence when cosmic threats kept showing up. But the damage was already done. Steve was right that they needed their autonomy, but he was right too late to save the team. That's why this scene is so much better than your average superhero fight. It's an argument about the nature of power that doesn't have an easy answer. So knowing everything that happened, whose side would you have been on? Would you have signed the accords to keep the peace, or would you have walked away to keep your conscience? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.